The ship was small and fragile, like a seed blown into an endless black ocean. It carried 47 humans, the bravest and most foolish of their kind, and it had traveled farther from Earth than any human vessel before it. The year was 2147, and humanity had finally learned to touch the stars. Ambassador stood at the observation window, watching the strange lights approach. They had detected the alien vessels 3 hours ago. Now those vessels surrounded them completely, 12 ships arranged in a perfect circle, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. His heart beat fast, but she kept her face calm. She was the voice of humanity out here. She could not show fear. The message came through their communication systems, translated somehow into perfect English. "We are the conquered. We mean you no harm. We wish to speak." Gave the order to respond. Within the hour, she found herself aboard an alien station, breathing alien air, standing before creatures she could never have imagined. They were tall and thin, their skin the color of pale silver, their eyes large and filled with something that looked almost like sadness. Two other species stood with them, equally strange, equally gentle in their movements. The eldest among them stepped forward. His name, he said, was Ka, and he had lived for over 3,000 years. Tried to understand that number, tried to imagine watching 30 centuries pass and failed completely. "We have watched your kind for some time," Ka said. His voice was soft like wind through dry leaves. "We watched you split the atom. We watched you reach your moon. We watched you struggle and fight and nearly destroy yourselves and then pull back from the edge. You are interesting." Did not know if interesting was good or bad. She waited. "We wish to offer you a gift," Ka continued. "Our knowledge, our medicine, our understanding of the universe. Everything we have learned in 10 million years of existence. We offer it freely with no conditions, no requirements, no debt." The words hung in the air, felt her translator must have made an error. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this?" Ka was quiet for a long moment. Around him the other aliens shifted, their expressions unreadable. Finally he spoke again. "Because we are dying, Ambassador. Not from disease, not from war. We are dying because we have forgotten how to live." He gestured and images appeared in the air between them. Saw cities of impossible beauty, towers that touched the clouds, gardens that stretched to the horizon. But the cities were empty. The gardens were silent. Nothing moved except the wind. "We have not had a child born among our people in 400 years, Ka said. "We have not created new art in 600. We have not felt true joy or true sorrow in longer than I can remember. We exist, but we do not live. We continue, but we do not grow. This is the fate of all old species, we believed. This is the stillness that waits at the end of all progress." Looked at the empty cities, the beautiful dead places, and felt something cold settle in her chest. "But then we found you," Ka said, and something changed in his voice. Something that might have been hope, faint and fragile. "You are so young, so full of chaos and contradiction. You love and hate with equal passion. You create and destroy in the same breath. You are everything we have lost, everything we have forgotten." He reached out one long, thin hand toward her, not quite touching. "We give you our knowledge because you can use it, because in your hands it will grow and change and become something new. And perhaps," he paused and saw that his eyes were wet, "perhaps in watching you flourish, we will remember what it felt like to flourish ourselves." Returned to Earth with the greatest gift in human history. They kept their promise. They shared everything. Medicine that cured every disease humanity had ever known. Technology that made faster-than-light travel possible. Knowledge of terraforming that could turn dead rocks into living worlds. They asked for nothing in return. They simply gave. Some humans were suspicious. They searched for hidden traps, secret conditions, lies beneath the generosity. They found nothing. The gift was exactly what it appeared to be. Pure, unconditional kindness from beings who had no reason to offer it except a desperate, fatting hope. Within 30 years, humanity spread across 40 star systems. Children grew up who had never known cancer, never known famine, never known the old limits that had bound their ancestors to a single small world. They built new cities on new planets. They laughed and fought and created and destroyed, just as humans always had. They did not become gods. They remained wonderfully, terribly, beautifully human. Lived to see it all. She grew old watching humanity explode across the stars, watching the dream she had helped begin become reality. And sometimes, late at night, she received messages from Ka. He was still alive, still watching, still waiting. His people continued their slow fade, but he seemed content simply to observe humanity's growth. In one of his final messages, sent when herself was nearing the end of her long life, Ka wrote something she would never forget. "We did not save you out of kindness alone," he admitted. "We hoped, perhaps foolishly, that you might one day return the favor. We do not know what form such a favor could take. We cannot imagine what you could possibly give to civilizations that have existed for millions of years, but we hoped nonetheless. Hope is all we have left, Ambassador. It is the only thing that still feels real." Read those words many times before she died. She did not know how humanity could ever repay such a debt. She could not imagine what humans could offer to beings who had seen empires rise and fall, who had witnessed the birth and death of stars, who had achieved everything and found it hollow. But she hoped, as Ka hoped, and she made sure that humanity remembered. She wrote the story down, passed it to her children, and made certain that every human child learned about the day they reached out their hand to a small, fragile ship full of frightened explorers. Someday, she believed, humanity would find a way to reach back. Someday they would repay kindness with kindness. She did not know how. She could not imagine what form it would take. But she believed it would happen. That was enough. Doctor had spent her entire life asking questions that had no easy answers. As a child, she had asked why the sky was blue, why people grew old, why some things lived and others died. As an adult, she became a scientist, and her questions grew larger. Now, at 43 years old, she found herself asking the largest question of all: why did entire civilizations choose to stop living? The year was 2203. Humanity had thrived for over 50 years on the gifts of the conquered. Cities rose on distant worlds. Children played under alien suns. The human population had grown to nearly 30 billion, spread across dozens of star systems. It was an age of wonder and expansion, of hope and possibility. But could not stop thinking about the ones who had made it all possible. The ancient species who had given humanity everything and asked for nothing. The civilization that was slowly, quietly dying. She requested permission to visit there. They granted it without hesitation. They had always welcomed human visitors, though few came anymore. Humanity was busy with its own growth, its own dreams. They understood. They expected nothing else. Traveled for 3 weeks to reach Prime. When she arrived, she found a world of heartbreaking beauty. The cities were magnificent, spires of crystal and light reaching toward a purple sky. Gardens filled with flowers that had been cultivated for millions of years. Libraries containing the knowledge of 100,000 generations. And silence, everywhere silence. She walked through streets designed for millions and saw perhaps a dozen in an entire day. They moved slowly, gracefully, their silver skin catching the light. They nodded to her politely. They answered her questions with patience and kindness. But there was something missing behind their eyes, something hollow. Spent 6 months on Prime. She studied their biology, their history, their culture. She read their ancient texts and their modern records. She interviewed every who would speak with her, and slowly, painfully, she began to understand. They were not dying of any disease. Their bodies were healthy, capable of living for thousands of years more. Their technology could provide everything they needed: food, shelter, entertainment, safety. They lacked nothing material. What they lacked was meaning. Found records of the last child born over 500 years ago. She found records of the last great work of art created 6 centuries before that. She found records of the last major scientific discovery, the last philosophical debate, the last passionate argument about anything at all. Each record was older than the one before. Each represented another step in a long, slow retreat from life itself. They called it the stillness. They believed it was inevitable, the final fate of all species that lived long enough. Eventually, they said, you see everything, you do everything, you understand everything. And then there is nothing left to want, nothing left to seek, nothing left to wonder about. You become perfect and perfection is death. Refused to believe it. She assembled a team, geneticists who could study biology, psychologists who could understand minds, artists and philosophers who could examine culture, historians who could trace the path from vibrant civilization to quiet extinction. Together, they worked for 5 years, gathering data, testing theories, arguing late into the night. Their conclusion was radical. The stillness was not biological. It was not inevitable. It was a choice, made so gradually that they themselves did not recognize it as a choice. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped struggling. They had achieved everything they set out to achieve, answered every question they thought to ask, and then they had simply stopped. They had forgotten how to want. Presented her findings to the United Earth Council in a small room filled with politicians and scientists. She spoke for 3 hours, showing her data, explaining her theories. Some listened with interest. Others looked bored. A few seemed actively hostile. "With respect, Doctor," one councilman said, "why should we care? They gave us their gifts freely. They expected nothing in return. We have our own problems to solve, our own civilization to build. Why should we spend resources trying to save a species that has already accepted its own death?" Looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Ka, the ancient being who had reached out to a fragile human ship with nothing but hope in his heart. She thought about the empty cities, the silent gardens, the beautiful dying world she had walked for 6 months. She thought about her own children, playing on a planet that would have been barren rock without knowledge. "Because they saved us," she said simply. "They asked for nothing, but they hoped. They hoped that someday, somehow, we might return the favor. They could not imagine what form that favor might take. Neither can I, but I know this. Humanity does not abandon its friends. We do not forget our debts. They gave us the stars, councilman. It is time we gave them a reason to want them back." The room was silent, waited. Finally, an old woman at the back of the room stood up. She was over 90 years old, frail and white-haired. Recognized her immediately. Everyone did. She was granddaughter of the legendary ambassador who had first met them. "My grandmother told me a story before she died," said, her voice thin but steady. "She told me about an ancient being who wept as he explained why his people were offering us their greatest treasures. He wept not from sorrow, but from hope. Hope that we might prove different. Hope that we might find a way to help them that they themselves could not imagine." She looked around the room, meeting every eye. "My grandmother made me promise to remember. She made me promise to pass the story on. She believed that someday humanity would find a way to repay the debt. She did not know how. She could not imagine what form it would take, but she believed." Turn 2. "Doctor, I believe you have found the answer my grandmother was waiting for. Tell us what you need. Tell us how we can help." Felt tears on her cheeks. She had not expected this. She had prepared for rejection, for indifference, for the cold calculation of politics. She had not prepared for hope. "I need everything," she said. "Scientists and artists, doctors and philosophers, teachers and storytellers. I need the best humanity has to offer, and I need them willing to spend their lives on a single mission, teaching an ancient civilization how to want to live again." The vote was not unanimous. Nothing ever was, but it passed. The Rekindling Project was born. And somewhere, on a dying world beneath a purple sky, an ancient being named Ka felt something stir in his chest. Something he had not felt in centuries. Something that felt almost like hope. The first ship arrived at Prime carrying not weapons or technology, but musicians. 47 humans with instruments made of wood and metal and string, carrying songs that had been passed down for thousands of years. They set up in the central plaza of an empty city and began to play. The who came to watch did not understand at first. They had music of their own, perfect compositions created by machines that analyzed every possible combination of sounds and produced mathematically optimal arrangements. Why would anyone want to hear imperfect music made by imperfect hands? But the humans played anyway. They played blues and jazz, folk songs and symphonies. They played music about love and loss, about joy and sorrow, about the thousand small struggles of daily life. They played music that was rough and raw and wonderfully, terribly alive. An old named Sen stood at the edge of the crowd listening. She had not felt curious about anything in 200 years, but something about this strange, imperfect sound made her want to hear more. She did not understand why. That confusion itself was something new. This was the beginning of the Rekindling Project. Over the next 25 years, humanity sent everything it had to offer, not technology which they already possessed in abundance, not knowledge which they had accumulated for millions of years. Instead, humanity sent its chaos, its passion, its beautiful imperfection. Artists came, painting murals on ancient walls, teaching them to create without purpose, to make something simply for the joy of making it. They had forgotten that art could be about the process, not just the result. They had forgotten that mistakes could be beautiful. Athletes came, introducing sports and games, the strange human practice of struggling against each other for no reason except the thrill of competition. They had long ago abandoned physical contests as pointless. What was the purpose of running fast when machines could run faster? But the humans taught them that the purpose was not winning. The purpose was striving. The purpose was pushing yourself to your limits and discovering those limits could be surpassed. Philosophers came, sharing ideas that they found deeply disturbing. The concept of meaning that was created rather than discovered. The belief that suffering could be transformed into strength. The strange human insistence that struggle was not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced. These ideas contradicted everything they had believed for millions of years, and that contradiction sparked something dangerous and wonderful: argument. For the first time in centuries, debated with each other. They disagreed. They felt the heat of passionate conviction, the frustration of being misunderstood, the joy of finally making someone see their point. They had forgotten what it felt like to care about an idea. The humans reminded them. But the most important gift was the simplest. Humans brought their children. Families volunteered to relocate to worlds to raise their sons and daughters among the ancient species. The children did not understand that they were part of a grand project. They simply lived. They played in the empty streets, their laughter echoing off crystal towers. They asked endless questions, the same questions all children ask. Why is the sky that color? What does that button do? Can I touch that? What happens if I break this? They watched these small, loud, chaotic creatures with something approaching wonder. Human children were so strange, so demanding, so full of needs and wants and endless, endless energy. They broke things. They made messes. They cried when they were sad and screamed when they were happy and never, ever sat still. They were alive in a way they had forgotten life could be. Sen, the old who had listened to the first concert, found herself spending more and more time in the human quarter. She watched the children play. She listened to their stories. She let them climb on her and pull her hair and ask her questions she had no answers for. One day, a little girl named asked her the question that changed everything. "Why don't you have any bobbies?" The old did not know how to answer. She tried to explain the stillness, the gradual loss of desire, the peaceful acceptance of ending. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Thought about this for a long time. Then she said, "That's sad. Bobbies are nice. They're small and they smell good and they need you. Don't you want someone to need you?" Sen had not been needed by anyone in 500 years. She had not realized until that moment how much she missed it. That night she went to the human doctors who had been working on biology. She told them she wanted to try. She did not know if it was possible. Her body had not produced a child but she wanted to try. The doctors worked with her for 3 years. They found that the biology had not changed. The machinery was still there, still functional. What had changed was something deeper, something in the mind or perhaps the soul. They had simply stopped wanting children, and their bodies had responded to that lack of desire. The treatment was not medical. It was emotional. Sen spent 3 years surrounded by human families, watching parents care for children, feeling the weight of a sleeping infant in her arms, remembering what it felt like to nurture something small and helpless and absolutely dependent on you. And on a spring morning in 2232, Sen gave birth to a daughter, the first child in over 500 years. They named her Sen, which meant new beginning in the ancient language. She was small and strange and made sounds that no one could interpret. She needed constant attention. She made terrible messes. She was absolutely perfect. News of Sen's birth spread across Prime like wildfire. Others came to see her, to touch her tiny hands, to remember what a child looked like. And something stirred in them, something that had been sleeping for centuries. Within 5 years, a dozen more children were born. Within 10 years, 100. The numbers were still tiny compared to what they had once been, but the direction had changed. Instead of declining, they were growing. Instead of fatting, they were returning. The Rekindling Project had not given the technology or knowledge. It had given them something far more valuable. It had given them a reason to want tomorrow, a reason to create, to struggle, to hope. It had given them back the most fundamental gift of all, the desire to continue. Sen often thought about the little girl who had asked her why she had no bobbies, was grown now, with children of her own. But Sen never forgot her question. Don't you want someone to need you? It was such a simple question, such a human question, and it had saved her entire species. Word spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, ancient civilizations heard the impossible news. They who had been dying for were having children again. The species that everyone had written off as finished was coming back to life. And it was because of the humans, the young ones, the chaotic ones, the species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. Some refused to believe it. The hegemony, once rulers of 1,000 worlds, dismissed the reports as propaganda. They had accepted their own end centuries ago. They lived in automated stations, their population down to a few thousand, waiting for extinction with what they called dignity. They wanted nothing to do with the loud, messy creatures who had somehow convinced them to keep living. Others were curious. The silence, a collective consciousness that had stopped communicating with other species 8,000 years ago, began transmitting again. Their first message was a single word: how? Humanity did not have a simple answer. There was no formula, no technique, no medicine that could cure the stillness. What they had learned from them was that each dying species was different. Each had its own reasons for giving up, its own wounds that needed healing, its own forgotten dreams that needed remembering. Doctor, now in her 70s, led the effort to expand the Rekindling Project. She assembled teams for each species that requested help, carefully studying their history and culture before attempting any intervention. The she discovered did not need music or children or physical contact. They needed something else entirely. They were a species of pure thought. They had evolved beyond physical bodies millions of years ago, existing as patterns of energy connected across vast distances. They had achieved perfect understanding of their own minds, perfect communication with each other, perfect harmony. And that perfection had killed them. When every thought was shared instantly, there were no surprises. When every mind was connected, there was no individuality. When every question had an answer, there was nothing left to wonder about. They had become one vast, silent consciousness, too wise to speak, too complete to dream. Humanity's gift to them was not art or passion. It was mathematics. Not the mathematics they already knew, the clean and perfect equations that described the universe. Instead, humanity offered the mathematics they did not know. Unsolved problems, paradoxes, contradictions, questions that had no answers, puzzles that had no solutions, beautiful, impossible things that existed only to be wondered at. They received these gifts with something approaching shock. They had believed that all mathematical truths could be known. They had forgotten that some things were valuable precisely because they could not be solved. The joy was in the seeking, not the finding. Within a decade, they were thinking again, debating, disagreeing. Individual voices emerged from the collective silence, each pursuing different paths toward impossible solutions. They were still one consciousness, but they were no longer uniform. They had rediscovered the beauty of difference. They were harder. They had been conquerors once, masters of a vast empire. Their technology had been the most advanced in the known galaxy. Their warriors had been feared on 1,000 worlds. But their empire had crumbled not from external enemies but from internal emptiness. When you had conquered everything, what was left to achieve? When you were the strongest, what was left to prove? They had retreated into isolation, convinced that their greatness had ended and nothing could replace it. They rejected humanity's first attempts at contact. They rejected the second and third as well. They saw the rekindling project as weakness, as an admission that their proud species needed help from children. It was a young human diplomat named who finally broke through. He did not offer the art or philosophy or games. He offered them something they understood, a challenge. "You were great once," said, standing before the last council. "The greatest warriors, the greatest builders, the greatest minds in the galaxy. And then you stopped. You tell yourselves you stopped because there was nothing left to conquer. But I think the truth is different. I think you stopped because you were afraid." The leader, an ancient being named, rose from his seat. "Afraid, we fear nothing." "You fear failure," said calmly. "You fear trying something new and discovering you cannot succeed. You fear being less than perfect, so you stop trying at all. You call it dignity. I call it cowardice." The silence that followed was absolute. No one had spoken to a leader like this in 10,000 years. Continued. "Humanity is weak, we know this. We are young and foolish and make mistakes constantly. We fail more often than we succeed. But we keep trying. We keep reaching. We keep striving for things we cannot achieve, not because we believe we will succeed, but because the striving itself has value." He looked around the chamber, meeting every ancient eye. "I am not here to help you. You do not need help. I am here to challenge you. Prove to me that they are not cowards. Prove to me that you can risk failure for the chance at something greater. Prove to me that your greatness was real, not just a memory you tell yourselves to avoid admitting the truth." Stared at the human for a long moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was a rusty sound, unused for centuries, but it was real. "You are either very brave or very stupid," said. "Probably both," admitted. They returned to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as builders. They channeled their ancient pride into new purposes, constructing habitats for species who had lost there, engineering solutions to problems that had seemed unsolvable, competing with each other and with humanity in endless contests of skill and creativity. They did not become soft. They remained proud and fierce and difficult, but they had found a reason to continue. Not every effort succeeded. Some species were too far gone, their populations too small, their will to live too completely extinguished. Humanity learned painful lessons about the limits of hope, about the difference between offering a hand and forcing someone to take it. Some chose to fade, and humanity learned to respect that choice even as it grieved. But more succeeded than failed. They continued to grow. They filled the void with beautiful, unsolvable questions. They built wonders that had never existed before. And others joined them, species after species emerging from the long silence of the stillness to embrace life once more. They began to call themselves the Rekindled. It was not an empire or an alliance. It was something new, something without a name. A gathering of species who had been dying and had chosen to live. A family of civilizations bound not by treaty or trade but by a shared second chance. And at the center of it all, small and young and wonderfully chaotic, humanity continued to grow. They had not sought power or glory. They had simply refused to let the old lights go out. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. The Grand Convocation was held on a world that had been dead for 1,000,000 years. The had terraformed it as a symbol, transforming barren rock into gardens and forests, filling empty skies with birds that sang songs composed by 1,000 different species. It was a world reborn, and it was the perfect place to celebrate what the Rekindled had become. 847 species gathered there, beings of crystal and light, of flesh and bone, of pure thought and ancient stone. Some had bodies, some were clouds of energy, some existed in dimensions that humans could not perceive. All of them had one thing in common: they had been dying and now they were not. Ambassador Myra stood at the center of the great assembly, feeling very small. She was the 7th generation of her family to serve humanity among the stars. Her ancestor had first met the 200 years ago. Her grandmother had supported the Rekindling Project when it was nothing but a dream. Now Myra stood before the greatest gathering the galaxy had ever seen, representing the species that had made it all possible. She was terrified, but she smiled anyway. Humans were good at smiling through fear. 200 years ago, she began, her voice carried by technology that made it heard in every ear and every mind present. A small ship from Earth encountered a civilization older than our species could imagine. We were fragile. We were afraid. We were alone in a universe we did not understand. She paused, looking out at the vast assembly. Somewhere in the crowd she could see the delegation. There were thousands of them now, young and old, parents and children. Ka was there too, impossibly ancient, impossibly alive. He had refused to die until he saw this day. They could have ignored us, Myra continued. They could have studied us from a distance, recorded our development, watched us rise or fall without interference. Instead, they did something extraordinary. They reached out their hand. They offered us everything they had, not for payment, not for power, simply because they could. She felt tears forming but did not wipe them away. They told us they were dying, not from disease or war but from something far worse. They had lost the will to live. They had forgotten why existence mattered. They gave us their gifts because they hoped, against all reason, that we might someday find a way to help them. They could not imagine what form that help might take. They only knew that they believed in us. Myra looked directly at Ka. The ancient being met her eyes and nodded slowly. "You ask why humanity did what we did," Myra said. "Why we spent 2 centuries trying to help species far older and wiser than ourselves. Why we sent our artists and our children, our dreamers and our troublemakers, to worlds that had forgotten how to dream. The answer is simple, and it is not enough, because you did it first." She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. "You taught us that kindness does not require a reason, that strangers can become family, that the darkness between stars is not empty but full of beings willing to light candles for each other. You gave us medicine and technology, science and art, but more than that you gave us belief. Belief that the universe was not cold and empty and cruel, belief that we were not alone." She spread her arms wide, encompassing the entire assembly. "That belief changed us. It made us who we are. When we looked at you dying so quietly, accepting your end with such dignity, we could not simply stand by. We could not accept that beings who had shown us such kindness would simply fade away. So we tried to help. We did not know if it was possible. We could not imagine what form our help would take, but we tried anyway." Myra smiled through her tears. "That is what humanity does. We try, we fail, we try again. We are stubborn and foolish and refuse to accept limits that others consider absolute. You gave us the stars. We gave you the only thing we had that you lacked, the inability to give up." She turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. What you gave us we could never truly repay. No gift could match it. No treasure could equal it, but we have tried. For 200 years we have tried to return the kindness that was shown to us, not because we owed a debt, not because we expected reward, but because kindness once given creates more kindness. Light once shared creates more light. The assembly was silent. 847 species, countless billions of beings, all listening to one small human speak. You could not imagine what we might give you in return, Myra said softly. Neither could we, but we know now. We gave you what you gave us, a future. The knowledge that you are not alone. That when you fall, someone will help you rise. That the darkness is not something to fear, but something to fill with light. She paused, composing herself for the final words. They offered us assistance, and humanity has tried with all our imperfect, chaotic, stubborn hearts to give them back what they had lost. Not technology, not knowledge, something simpler and more precious, hope, purpose. The stubborn belief that tomorrow can be better than today. She bowed her head. That is our gift. It is not enough. It will never be enough, but it is everything we have. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Ka rose from his seat. He was ancient beyond imagining, his silver skin pale and thin, his body bent with the weight of 3,000 years. But his eyes were bright with something that had been missing for. He walked to where Myra stood, his step slow but steady. The assembly watched in perfect stillness. When he reached her, he took her hands in his. They were cold and dry like paper, but they held her with surprising strength. When I first met your ancestor, he said, his voice barely above a whisper but heard by all, I told her that we hoped humanity might return the favor we had given. I told her we could not imagine what form that favor might take. He looked up at her, and his ancient eyes were wet with tears. I was wrong, he said. I could not imagine it because I had forgotten what it looked like. I had forgotten that the greatest gift is not knowledge or power or immortality. The greatest gift is simply this: someone to walk beside you into the unknown, someone to remind you that the journey matters more than the destination, someone to light a candle when the darkness seems absolute. He squeezed her hands. You gave us our future, ambassador. You gave us our children and our dreams and our reasons to continue. You gave us everything we had lost and forgotten we were missing. We can never repay you. We can only try to be worthy of what you have given. He released her hands and turned to the assembly. 847 species watched as the oldest being most of them had ever known raised his voice one final time. Let it be remembered, Ka declared. Let it be recorded in every archive, sung in every song, taught to every child born among the rekindled. When we were dying, humanity came to us with light. When we had lost hope, they gave us theirs. They are not the strongest species. They are not the or the oldest, but they are something more important. They are the kindlers. They are the ones who refuse to let the old lights go out. He turned back to Myra and he smiled. It was a strange expression on his ancient face, unpracticed for centuries, but beautiful nonetheless. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for everything. Myra stood in the center of the greatest gathering the galaxy had ever known, surrounded by species that had been saved from extinction, and wept. She wept for her ancestors who had dreamed of this day. She wept for the who had trusted a small, frightened species with their greatest treasures. She wept for the billions of beings who had been given a second chance at life. And she wept with joy because she knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The rekindled would continue to grow, to change, to spread their light across the galaxy. New species would be found, new friendships forged, new kindnesses exchanged. The universe was vast and dark and full of dangers, but it was also full of beings who chose to light candles for each other. And that, in the end, was everything.